YouTube channel. However, you don't need to worry. You are not part of that recording. We are only recording those of us who are unmuted and speaking. So you just need to stay muted and you will not be recorded for posterity. Ask any questions that you have. We will store them up and Davith and I will pose them for you at the end of the night. So use the chat box and you can store up those questions. And now I'd like to turn things over to Ellen Beale from the Saratoga Book Festival to say a quick welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So thank you, Rachel. Thank you, David, and thank you, Northshire Bookstore, for once again hosting a Saratoga Book Festival online program. We were scheduled to launch the book festival, sadly, this last spring. COVID had other plans. So we have now launched a monthly series of book chats with Northshire Bookstore and the library to help in many ways share the wonderful books and authors who were going to appear at the festival last spring, Michael being one of them. So thrilled to have Michael here. And we have a new date. So we're going to launch October 15th through 17th, 2021. And we're looking forward to seeing and welcoming you to our wonderful lineup. So follow us on Facebook and our website at saratogabookfestival.org to hear the news as soon as we start sharing the authors. So looking forward to tonight. I'll turn it back over to you folks, and I think it's going to be a really great discussion. So enjoy.
Tonight, it is my very great pleasure to welcome Michael Ian Black to Northshire Live and the Saratoga Book Festival. He is an actor, comedian, and writer who started his career with the sketch comedy show The State on MTV and has created and starred in many other television shows, The Baxter, and Sex Options. I first encountered his work as a writer in the incredibly charming picture book series, I'm Bored, I'm Sad, and I'm Worried, all very appropriate for this year, among other things, and some of my real favorites for young children. His books for adults include the memoirs You're Not Doing It Right and Navel Gazing, and the essay collection My Custom Van. Tonight, he'll be interviewed about his latest book by Beck Krefting of Skidmore College. She is associate professor and chair of Skidmore's American Studies program and is also affiliate faculty to gender studies, intergroup relations, and media and film studies. She's the author of All Joking Aside, American Humor and Its Discontents. Please join me in welcoming them both.
Well, hi, Beck, and hi, Rachel, and everybody. Thank you for hosting and having me. And Beck, I feel like I'm just as interested in interviewing you because of all the things that you know about and do. That's a very impressive resume you have.
Michael, the pleasure and honor is all mine. So please, thank you. No flattery needed. But this is about you tonight, right? This is about a book that you have published. I'm just going to do this so that everyone can see the book. Yay. And I'm, perfect. That was perfect.
A match.
Thank you for the copy of this book, folks at Northshire and Michael, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm a huge fan, Michael, and so I'm very excited. You wouldn't know this, but we have a ton in common. We're both feminists born in the 70s. You grew up with a lesbian mother. I am a lesbian, so you should feel right at home.
Are you also a mother?
I'm not. Well, depends on how you qualify that. I also
of humans.
Okay, so I have a dog son, and you have a son named Elijah. So again, another commonality there. It's pretty uncanny. Also, I have a few of my comedy geek buddies who are tuning in. I sent out a few carrier pigeons to some friends and also to some comedy experts. And so I have to read you this text that I got from one of them. So this is from a friend of mine named Phil Skapansky, and he's a TV comedy expert working at Marist College, also in New York. And he said, "Oh my goodness, I can't make it, but if you get a chance, tell him that this TV comedy expert, because that's how he refers to himself, thinks Stella was maybe the best / funniest show Comedy Central ever aired.
Oh, that's so nice.
Right?
Really nice, particularly coming from a TV comedy expert. I mean, geez.
And he only used the one qualifying maybe. Otherwise, it was the best / funniest. And I mean, that sounds like that you really hit the mark on that one.
Stella, for the people watching who don't know, was a short-lived series on Comedy Central, which I co-created and co-wrote and co-starred with two of my dear friends, David Wayne and Michael Showalter, who I had worked with previously on a sketch comedy show called The State. And Stella was our, like, I guess the way we pitched it was a modern day Marx Brothers-y type thing. It was a very absurd, sort of surreal three-headed monster of just these bumbling idiots moving through the world. And for my money, it's my favorite thing that I think I've done just as like as a TV series. Like I really thought it was funny and innovative and special, and the audience did not agree, other than your TV expert friend.
Also, TV expert friend who just let me know that he is actually in the room. So I should maybe let him talk for himself. But he worked with your cousin at a musical instrument store. Your cousin from Minnesota who played in a ska band in high school.
Oh, so that would be a cousin through marriage. My wife is from Minnesota, and she has many, many cousins. So I'm not sure which of them played in a ska band in high school, but that sounds right. Certainly sounds right.
All right. Well, the point is 6 degrees. We've got less than that here.
Yeah.
Separation.
Now 0 degrees because we've met and are very, very good friends.
And will be forever. Let's talk about your book, Michael. I follow your stand-up comedy, and in your stand-up special Noted Expert in 2016, you have this bit about taking your son to an amusement park and then nearly fainting afterwards after riding the Tilt-A-Whirl. Very funny joke. And then I saw that in 2018, you wrote an op-ed for the New York Times in response to the massacre of students in Parkland, Florida. And you raise concerns about performances of masculinity in our country. And so I can see how personal experiences and national events may have informed your decision to write this book, but I'd rather not make assumptions. So could you tell us in your own words about the moment or moments that when you knew you needed to write this book?
There were many moments leading up to it, including almost passing out at the amusement park after going on the Tilt-A-Whirl. But that, although the thread of that joke and other jokes that I have made throughout my career is about sort of questioning masculinity and what it means to be a man, and people's perception of manhood, including my own. And I didn't really realize that was a running theme of my work until, I don't know, a few years ago. Maybe when I was writing one of my previous books. But in hindsight, I know it's been running through my entire life. What immediately precipitated the writing of this book, as you said, was the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And I have been a vocal opponent of our lax gun laws in this country since Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook occurred in the town next to my own at a time when both of my kids were in elementary school. And I write about that in this book and what that experience was like, being so close to that event, literally and figuratively. And so I've been sort of following and speaking out about, I've been speaking out against gun violence in particular since then. And Marjorie Stoneman Douglas happened when my kids were in high school. That was at a high school. And when these events happen, what I normally do is get on Twitter and yell into the void because I don't know what else to do. And it is at least as ineffective as anything else I might do. So this time I went on and was ranting and raving as I always do. But the focus of it took a slightly different direction for the first time, because it occurred to me for the first time that while I'm always out there yelling about guns, one of the things I never acknowledged and never heard anybody else really talk about either was the fact that the people pulling the triggers on these crimes are always boys and young men. And so I just started asking, why is that? Why, when these things happen, do we know before we have any reporting on it? We already know it's a guy. The instances of girls doing this is vanishingly small. So that was it. I went on this little Twitter rant and I was done. Then the New York Times got in touch with me and said, do you want to write an op-ed about this? And I was like, I don't think so. I don't think I'm capable of doing that. I'm a guy who yells on Twitter. And they were like, yeah, but we're the New York Times. And I was like, oh yeah, you're the New York Times. I guess I should try. So like, it was literally like an ego thing where I was like, yeah, I mean, I really don't feel qualified to do this, but I do have something to say about it. And it is the New York Times, so let me try. So I tried. And I wrote an op-ed and it came out, it got some attention. And then a publisher came to me and said, do you want to expand it into a book? And again, I said, I don't know that I can. I just don't feel qualified to do this. I don't feel smart enough. I'm not, like you, a gender theorist. I'm a college dropout, you know? And when I went to college, it was to study acting. Like, I'm an idiot, like a full bore idiot. And the woman who became my publisher basically said, you may be an idiot, Michael, but you have a son. We had talked about this. You have a son who's about to leave, and you have a platform and you have a voice. So why not you? And I was kind of like, yeah, why not me? You know, I was sort of like, I didn't have a good answer to that. And it wasn't, and me sitting down to write this book really wasn't about ego, and it certainly wasn't about money. It was about, more than anything, walking towards the fear of my own uncertainty and feeling like I could say something to my son that I thought maybe had some value. And my daughter. I mean, this book is written as a letter to my son because it's about issues specific to boys and young men. But I think, but there's a lot of it that's also addressed to my daughter. And so I thought I would try, and it was really hard. It was dead hard.
It really speaks to the value of stepping up and doing what is fearful or challenging, and the rewards that can be, brought from that. But good for you for stepping into that unknown, and you pull it off. I mean, I don't think I quite anticipated that answer. It feels like this is very true and authentic to who you are. It doesn't feel contrived in any way. It feels earnest and real. And so I guess one of the questions I had is sort of the writing process. As a writer myself, I find it sometimes even violent what I have to exclude, like what I can't include and what I already know, but I still have to exclude it. And so the process of editing can feel dramatic to me. Sometimes I feel sad because I'm not able to include stuff, but maybe that's just me. I guess I'm thinking about, or wanting you to talk about, what's your process? What writing challenges did you face? You have titles that cleverly double as directives to the readers, like be yourself, breathe. Violence is almost never the answer. And so I'm wondering what was your writing process like? What didn't you include? And any tough decisions that you made throughout the process?
Okay, so the first thing is the little subtitles were my editor's idea. She really liked that idea and she had to kind of win me over to it. So she gets full credit for that. The challenges were many, beginning with my own imposter syndrome, because I didn't, for the reasons that I outlined before, I didn't feel qualified to write this book. And I didn't feel, although I had a lot of opinions about it, about the subject, I didn't feel like they were rooted in anything provable, or I didn't know what the literature was about any of this stuff. There's a lack of, at least in the mainstream, and I think this was part of the reason why my publisher wanted me to write this book, there's a lack of mainstream books from guys talking to guys about this subject. I think for the very real reason that they fear nobody will buy that book, because guys don't want to hear about masculinity. We need to, but we don't want to hear about it. So I had to start with research. I had to start by just reading broadly about a host of topics that I thought might come into play, starting with sociology and feminism and the few books that I could find specifically about masculinity and the history of masculinity, and specifically American masculinity. I was reading about happiness and love. I was reading stuff about race. I was reading, gosh, a lot. I'll just whatever felt germane. And then it was about figuring out kind of the mile markers that I wanted to set out. Because the question in the book is basically like, how do we get better as guys? And to answer that question, I had to figure out what it even means to be a guy, which is, as I said at the very beginning, like kind of the theme of a lot of my work in general. And so it meant kind of distilling what I thought the characteristics of manhood, the way we think about manhood, are, for better or for worse, and then getting under their skin and seeing if I could just look at them from the kind of as wide a view as I could, and as close a view as I could, also the macro and the micro. And so that's what this book was. In terms of leaving things out, because it's a letter to my son, like, I feel like I could have gone deeper on any one of these topics, but it would have risked it becoming academic, and I didn't, A, I'm not qualified to write an academic book, and B, I didn't think it was appropriate. So a lot of this stuff is, it's primer stuff. It's like, hey, if you want to think about feminism, like, these are sort of broad ways to think about feminism. If you want to think about racism, these are broad ways to start thinking about racism. But all of it is directed at you, my kid, as a way to sort of get your engine going, hopefully, and at least give you the foundation for thinking about these things that I never had. So it's meant to be, for lack of a better word, masculinity for dummies. I'm not calling my kid a dummy by any means. I wouldn't do that to his face. I wouldn't do that to his face.
Well, I love that you were talking about some of the writers and scholars that you consulted in the process. You, in your acknowledgments, you mentioned several too, people like Michael Kimmel, who is a preeminent scholar in masculinity studies, Barbara Ehrenreich, cultural analyst and ethnographer, Bell Hooks, who's one of my personal favorite authors, public intellectual and feminist media studies scholar. And so would you talk a little bit about the influence of one or any one of these writers on your book? Like, how did their ideas help you to write this book?
So I can go in order. Well, Michael Kimmel wrote, I hope I don't get the title wrong. He's written a lot of books, but the one that I thought was so informative for me, I think it's called, geez, I'm going to look it up. I have it in my nonfiction room. I don't have it right in front of me. What does he call it? Manhood in America, which is such an interesting and scholarly book about literally that, about what manhood has meant in America from its founding all the way through today. And it was just so illuminating because our founding ideas about who we are as a country, according to Kimmel, and I don't have any reason to doubt him, I think he's right, have always expressed a tension between the kind of, what he sort of, half disparagingly calls the effete sort of European aristocracy idea of manhood versus the sort of Wild West frontier idea of manhood. And we see that tension. It's our entire political system in a lot of ways. And those two ideas they're not as binary as that. They can overlap. I mean, George Washington is kind of a perfect example of an Enlightenment guy who sort of embraced European ideals and Enlightenment ideals, and dressed well and was concerned with appearance and aesthetics, but also was a frontiersman and also was a general, and really kind of embraced perfectly the overlap in those two paradigms of what American masculinity could be. And so it was sort of fascinating to have him break down those ideas. Bell Hooks is just so smart and reflective and wise on ideas about feminism as an activity, as a kind of model of living, and the way that she embraces the idea of love as a force, also I find really powerful. And Barbara Ehrenreich, I just feel like, has been an amazing scholar of the American experience, primarily the female American experience, for decades now. And her work is always, I just find her captivating.
Yeah, her writing is terrific. As an ethnographer and someone who wants to make my work accessible to the public.
Beck, what's an ethnographer?
Someone who studies people or persons or communities in order to create a cultural portrait of that person or a community. So she goes around and she's,
it's not a map maker. It's not you say ethnographer, I think, oh, that's a map maker, but that's not what that's a cartographer, I guess.
No, studying people and writing about it in a way that's accessible and really interesting.
Yeah, fascinating.
I value that and want to emulate it. So the folks here might be interested to know that, you're writing this book about masculinity, and you're not a fan of the term that's bandied about so frequently. You know what I'm about to say, toxic masculinity. So you say and write at length why you don't prefer that term. Can you say a little bit more about that to folks here, about why that term is insufficient or problematic?
There's a couple of reasons why I don't like it. The first is a problem with how we think about masculinity in general right now, which is that we don't have a healthy model of masculinity. We don't know what that is in this culture. And so the term toxic, I feel like, adheres itself so cleanly and neatly to masculinity because we don't quite know what to contrast it with. And that term toxic embodies a lot of characteristics and attributes that I don't think are toxic, because it sort of labels all of what I call traditional masculinity, or it sometimes has the effect of labeling all of the characteristics of what I call traditional masculinity as toxic. And so examples of that would be strength, independence, sometimes um, uh, fortitude. These are sort of traditionally masculine ideals that we celebrate a lot right now with young girls and women. And we say, you know, we applaud strong women and fierce women and independent women and all of that. But with guys, we correctly recognize that those same attributes can sort of teeter over into what we call toxic, abusive, destructive behavior, directly as a result of the way we've been conditioned to think about masculinity. So I try to stay away from the term, because I also think it makes guys immediately defensive. I think the joke I have in the book is the phrase toxic masculinity is a lot like the phrase New Jersey native. It's impossible to hear either without feeling defensive. And I say that as a New Jersey native. And I think it's true. You know, one of the reasons I think it's hard for guys to have this conversation, in particular white guys, is because we're conditioned already to be on our heels. And rather than kind of owning that or feeling comfortable in being uncomfortable with our own kind of shit, we tend to lash out and we tend to push it away, the way a lot of people do when they feel they're being threatened or attacked. You know, it becomes immediately adversarial. So I try to stay away from that term, because I think it becomes immediately adversarial.
So then, are there other rhetorical alternatives that allow us to acknowledge when social expectations for gender performances are too rigid or downright dangerous, right, for the well-being of men and those around them? So like what language do we use to alert ourselves to the troubling yet socially sanctioned behavior?
You go, you're being a dick, dude.
That's perfect. That's what I started with, you know, when I was 5. So that's
You're being such a dick right now. I don't know. I really don't. One of the, I mean, without getting into a conversation about language in general, which I don't want to do, but one of the kind of fascinating ways that language gets utilized in our culture is the way sometimes benign phrases or phrases that are meant to convey helpfulness get flipped around. The word feminism itself is a victim of that. It's become honed as a weapon. The phrase political correctness, toxic masculinity, I feel like is an accurate descriptor of something. And we all kind of know what that is, but it's been flung back in our faces as, you know, as a weapon. Safe spaces, same thing. You know, there's innumerable examples of this. So I don't know what the correct phraseology is right now. I really don't, but I try to avoid toxic masculinity.
Well, I think it's important to unpack all of that. And I think that you raised some really interesting concerns around the term. So I appreciated the writing and the conversation around it. And you also make it clear in the book and in some conversations I've heard you had that you don't want to reinvent masculinity. So masculinity isn't inherently bad, right? But you want to expand it. So when I hear something like that, it makes me think of masculinity seeming as a kind of monolith, of this sort of like, if you think of masculinity as sort of a globule that you just want to like make it a little bigger. But might we also understand that there have always been myriad performances of masculinity, but that only one kind of performance of masculinity ascends to dominance becoming the standard bearer of masculine performance. So it's a way of seeing that we already have all of these ways of expressing masculinity, and that what we lack is the social allowance for men to perform in that way, to be sensitive, to wear nail polish, to wear pink, or to cry. So I guess what I'm asking is whether you see masculinity as singular or as plural, and what does it look like to expand masculinity? Like if you had your will to imagine what masculinity could be, what would it look like to expand that? And then this idea of, is it singular or plural? And do we do a disservice in sort of singularizing masculinity or not? I don't know.
I don't think masculinity is not any more singular than humanity is singular, just like femininity is no more singular than humanity is singular. But I think when I talk about masculinity, or the way when I talk about the way we talk about masculinity, what I'm talking about is a kind of rigid notion that I think we're all familiar with, even if we have sometimes a hard time defining what that is. Part of the reason it has become, I think, in some ways, it's in some quarters of the culture, it's become broader, and I think that's good. In some quarters of the country, I think it's become more rigid, and I think that's bad. That rigidity, I think, often stems from the good work of women to expand femininity. So one of the things I say in the book is that the first rule in masculinity, and this is me quoting another book, is no sissy stuff. And what that means is, anything related to girls is if you're associated with girls as a boy, that's bad. Anything that can be seen as girl-like for a guy, for a boy, is bad. And I think every guy kind of understands that the reason you can't wear pink as a boy is because somebody might think you're a girl. And if they think you're a girl, then you're diminished. You are no longer, you're a sissy, which is a kind of other thing. But as the work of women has expanded what the notions of being a woman can be, some men, maybe a lot of men, have felt the need to retreat into narrower slices of masculinity. I think that's where we get the idea of the angry white male. I think that's where that comes from, because what you see is progress in civil rights from women, from minorities, from gay people. And so the straight white dude is feeling, I'm doing a Zoom illustration, is feeling like they have to cower in their corner because they don't feel like, because somebody else's progress feels like in some way a threat to them. And I think, you could further break down why that is. So all I'm saying in this book is there a way for us to kind of move out of these corners? Not only because it will sort of make you feel better as a human. It's better for everybody if you can express the fullness of your humanity and not feel like you're backed into a very narrow corner of masculinity. That was a long, rambling answer, and I apologize.
No, I think that was helpful in terms of understanding how you're conceptualizing it. And so to move from discussions of masculinity, I'm interested in reception to your book. And so you lay out two key intentions for the book. You say, and I quote, that you wanted to, this is the quote part, write a loving, inclusive book that serves as a primer for guys to begin thinking about basic questions about modern masculinity, and quote, for regular non-academic men to have these conversations in ways that don't diminish their masculinity. So I was wondering if you have any evidence for understanding that this is actually happening, and whether or not these intentions are coming to fruition, or what responses you have had from readers and fans.
So I certainly don't trust that. No, I don't trust that it's having any impact at all. I really, I, but the fact that, you know, the fact that like we're having this conversation, the fact that somebody wanted to publish this book, the fact that other books like this are coming out makes me optimistic that the broader conversation is starting to happen, and I think that's good. Obviously, when you're in the middle of something, you know, there's you as a author or as an actor or whatever, you experience anecdotally that people are affected, you know, because for one thing, like you Beck, you knew you were interviewing me, so you had to read the book, but I don't know if you would have read it otherwise. So, you know, from my perception, it's like, oh, somebody's reading the book. It's, you know, fantastic. I'm obviously doing great out here. But I don't have any evidence that it's finding any, that it's having any broader impact than the few anecdotes that I get here and there. That being said, the few anecdotes that I get here and there are lovely, you know, and I'm grateful for them. I wrote this book with the expectation that it would sell very few copies, and I think I've exceeded those expectations, but my expectations were pretty low.
I wanted, you know, one point of correction. Yeah, I definitely didn't read your book. No, I'm
Oh,
kidding.
you're making it beautifully.
I really did. And you presume that I wouldn't have already read it, and you presume right. But I very much enjoyed the book. And I am glad that you're getting, it sounds like some favorable feedback, but maybe not.
No, I definitely am. And I don't mean, when, you know, you quoted me saying you don't want to diminish anyone, I'm diminishing myself, so in a self-deprecating way. The honest response has been really warm and welcome. And I don't want to pretend otherwise. It has been really good.
Okay, so I'm going to go a little rogue. And since I have the opportunity to chat with you, one of the things I do is I interview comics.
Mhm.
And I would you mind if I just ask you like 2 questions?
No, you're
They're
the
gonna
interviewer. Your whole job is to ask me questions.
Well, no, this is a little off topic because it's not about the book, but it is about
Fine.
comedy.
Fine.
Okay, so I'm writing this book on stand-up comedy. I'm looking at the history of stand-up comedy, specifically the economy of stand-up comedy, like how things are produced, distributed, and consumed, and the forces that shape that. So I'm really interested in things like technologies, right, that shape all of this.
Mhm.
The rise of identity politics in the 70s and 80s, and how that's actually impacted the consumption of comedy. And then the sort of third part of it, which is what I want to pick your brain about, is I have this theory, and I have no proof for it, but I just have ideas. But I have this theory that there are moments in time where consumers want comedy to have a particular kind of emotion to it. So I believe that we are purchasing affect in no uncertain terms, where if in one period of time, I would say like there was a kind of a rage for rage in the 1980s. And I think we're in a particular moment where we're consuming vulnerability from our stand-up comedians. And I guess I just wanted to just float that and see, like, do you see that has any sort of foundation, that we're consuming emotions that make us feel certain ways that are connected to larger cultural and political sort of zeitgeist?
Yeah, of course. I mean, all entertainment is all entertainment ends up being a reflection of the culture from which it's arising. One of the benefits of stand-up comedy as an art form is that it can respond very, very quickly to the culture in a way that other art forms can't. A movie takes years to produce, a novel takes years to write, but stand-up comedy can be day of, you see this in the late night talk shows. Stand-up comedy can be, you read a headline, you make a joke. The last 4 years were really interesting from a comedian's point of view, at least from this comedian's point of view, watching comedians struggle with how to respond to the culture that they saw arising with the election of Donald Trump. This also speaks to the topic of the book. And one of the things that I saw happening is exactly what you just described, the emergence of comedians as vulnerable people versus invulnerable people. This wasn't new entirely. Richard Pryor certainly mined that territory incredibly effectively. But it was pretty far and few between. One of the most important moments, I think, in stand-up comedy over the last several years that really spoke to this was Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, a stand-up special that came out in which she talked about the limits of comedy, and feeling the need to, in a sense, reject comedy as a form because of the expectations of, she didn't say this, but I think it's correct in what she was saying. The expectations of invulnerability that she felt she had to be a successful comic. I've seen comedians really struggle with this, really struggle to figure out sort of what their voice should be. Comedians feeling like they needed to adapt. I don't mean that cynically, like they were feeling, oh, I gotta market myself in a certain way. I think they really felt the need to like say something. In a way, comedians became comforters over the last 4 years, which is a role that we're not used to. So I can't support your theory empirically, but I can support it in spirit.
That is all I need. And I will send you your
my Soros check.
I was gonna say, no, the form that you signed so that I can use your direct quotes in my book.
You've now been peer reviewed.
Yeah. So one last thing, I know, Rachel, I'll be very quick, but I'm thinking for the people in the room who might want to laugh in the near future, are there any comics, including yourself, who are doing innovative work under COVID that you would say, go and check them out? They need some love right now, or they're just doing really great stuff that you can get behind. Anybody you want to promote tonight?
It's funny. I've been consuming so little comedy in the age of COVID. Most of the comedy that I receive comes to me via Twitter. One of the young comedians that I actually don't know how young she is. I have no idea what her age is. She's younger than me. That's all I know. A Twitter account that I've been following, and she's going to do a show of mine on Saturday, is a woman named Broti Gupta, Broti Gupta, and she's just really dry and sardonic, and I find her really funny. Blair Erskine has been really funny doing videos. That's what's really been making me laugh, is people who do like TikToks. There's just been so many funny TikToks. I don't know his name, but there was a dude who did like the funniest TikTok, just illustrating the way your brain works. I don't know his name. And there was another guy, but I don't know. Yeah, I've been consuming a lot of like short form comedy. Sorry, my dogs are the worst. Comedy content. I feel like there's these guys, Auntie Donna, this Australian trio who have a TV show on Netflix that is so similar to Stella. That my friend who I did Stella with, David Wayne, said, you have to check these guys out. They're just like Stella. And it wasn't like, oh, they're ripping us off. I didn't feel like that at all. I don't think they knew who we were when they were sort of getting going, but it's a really similar sensibility and I find it really funny. And I've started to get to know those guys a little bit. And yeah, Auntie Donna.
This is great. We all have a few names to look up, and we can be assured we'll laugh later. And I will turn it back over to, I believe Rachel is gonna, and Dafid are going to conduct a Q&A with the audience. I'm not gonna leave. I'll stay
Please do.
Thanks so
for
much.
a few more minutes.
And thank you, Michael. Thank you both. This has been great. There's a first question from Sean. He says, what did your son and daughter think of the book? He says, asking this, he loved it himself. He thinks it's great as a person who's raised a son in a non-binary teen.
My son has not finished it. My daughter, I don't even think has opened it. Does that answer your question? My son likes the book. He does not love the way it's written, even though I think it's well written. He's like, I don't like your edited voice. And I'm like, well, yeah, but dude, like I can't talk to you in a book the way I'm talking to you exactly right this second, like I gotta put on my big boy clothes to write a book. So he likes the book, doesn't love it. My daughter hasn't read a word of it.
I'm actually wondering, as a follow-up to that, has it informed conversations that you've had with them? Have you found yourself from the research that you did talking to them differently?
Yeah. More, not so much in terms of like what we talk about, but I feel like it's been really good for me in terms of being, I think, more present and patient, not just with my kids, but with people in general. And I find myself measuring my own behavior against what I wrote to my son as aspirational behavior for him. Like, the title of the book, A Better Man, refers as much to myself trying to be better as anything else. Like I make all the mistakes that everybody makes, and I don't pretend otherwise. But having written this book and having spoken about it at length, I feel like I'm doing slightly better as a man.
That's really all any of us strive for, is to do a little bit better every day. There's a question from China in the chat asking, was the title selected to draw parallels to Maya Angelou's letter to my daughter, which is a very serious one?
No, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't know what that is. I mean, I know who Maya Angelou is, obviously. No, the reference was to Pearl Jam more than anything else. Because it's like, it's dad rock. I was like, oh, I'm a dad rock.
There's a question here from Bob. He says, did your work help you understand more on the motivations behind school shootings?
I think I would be a fool to say yes. I mean, I think there's so many complicated factors that go into them. I don't want to get on here and pretend that I understand it in any deep way. I think I understand culturally a little bit better the conditions that might make that possible.
There's a fabulous question to start off from Philip. He asks, I think of you as someone whose comedy is mostly in an ironic register. Assuming you agree, how was the transition to working in a more sincere register?
I disagree. Yeah, and I talk about this at length in the book, actually, how for me to get better as a human being, I had to learn how to abandon some of that irony and some of that sarcasm, because I understood that it was armor that I needed to let go, at least in part. It was preventing me from being the human that I wanted to be, the father I wanted to be, and the husband I wanted to be. And it was very hard when I wrote this book to trust that that would be okay, that it would be okay to not feel obligated to make jokes all the time, not feel obligated to be funny. When I do events like this, it's hard for me to trust that it's okay to not constantly be making jokes, because, people expect that from me. And I don't know what you charged for tickets tonight, $200, $300. So I don't want to let down the people.
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time, but I think we've got time for one more question, and it's a follow-up from Philip. He says, I'm curious about the ways in which you were motivated by Sandy Hook. Curious what thoughts you might have about the potential to, or the dangers of speaking to moments of trauma like that through comedy.
Well, I haven't figured out a way to, and I haven't even tried to figure out a way to speak about Sandy Hook comedically. One of the things that I'm conscious of is trying not to take I think we producers of content, a word that I hate, but I think is broad enough to talk about, to describe what I'm talking about, have to be cognizant of the fact of commercializing trauma. So particularly trauma that isn't our own. The thing, and maybe that might be something that's bugging me, I think, about, and I wrote about this a little bit last night on Twitter, because it's just bugging me. This Britney Spears documentary, which everybody's talking about and I watched. And the theme of the documentary is how this young woman was exploited and traumatized. And how we as a culture are culpable in doing this to Britney specifically, but people in general, and the sexualization of young girls, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what was really bugging me about it was the mining of that trauma and the elevation of that trauma as people taking on her victimhood as their own, which we see in, it starts with this idea of the Free Britney movement, which is these fans who are like, Free Britney, hashtag Free Britney. That kind of inhabiting somebody else's trauma, I think can be damaging and dangerous and exploitive in all the ways that we think we're, and I think people have the best intentions. They think they're being helpful and empathetic and benevolent. But I worry that it's having the opposite effect. That's probably it's a half-baked answer, but it's something that I've been sort of struggling to understand why that documentary in particular has bothered me. And I am conscious in my own writing and work of trying not to exploit trauma. If you're going to talk about trauma, let it be your own. And if it's not your own, honor it in ways that, I don't know how you honor it, but I think you have to be careful to honor it. So that was a bummer, right, of an answer? Was that a bummer of an answer?
That was actually great. You don't know this, but Phil, who asked the question, just published a book on trauma and comedy. So I think he's probably pretty excited about your answer.
Oh, interesting. Look, I mean, comedians mine trauma all the time for comedy, and I have no problem with that when it's their own. I mean, I think that's fine. You honor your own trauma and, you know, deal with it however you want. But yeah, I think it can quickly veer into exploitation if you're not careful.
Yeah, it's a thing that the whole literary community, I think, has really been grappling with for quite a while. We have one last lighter note question to wrap up with from Diane. She asked if there's any.
That didn't feel light enough to you as a way to end?
Not quite. Diane asks if there's any chance of a reunion of the state.
Well, we did reunite during this pandemic. In fact, I was just getting an email about it. So it will be available if you want to look at it, if you want to watch it. Wait, I might even have I don't think I have the information, but we did do a reunion show. I don't think there is much chance of a full reunion television series for two reasons. One is that there are many of us with competing schedules, and two is that nobody seems to want to buy the state television show. So I don't think that's likely in the near future. But yeah, I mean, we still do stuff together.
Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate it. This has been a lovely evening. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all for having me. I keep wanting to say thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Beck, and thank you, Ellen. And then I want to say thank you, Daffod, but I don't want to mispronounce your name.
That's
Daffod.
Happens a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yes, I'm sure. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Michael and Beck. Thank you, audience.
And thank you, Michael. Awesome.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Have a great night, everybody.
You too.